Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, irrespective of which part of the world you're in and tuning in for this very special conversation. I hope you're having a good day. My name is Barkha Dutt. I am a journalist, the founder editor of the digital platform, The Mojo Story, a columnist with the Washington Post, the Hindustan Times, and the Week magazine, and a lifelong feminist committed to issues related to the empowerment of women. And that is exactly what we're here to talk about today. It is my pleasure and honor to be your moderator and host at this moment. I know so many of you are tuning in and connecting to this very critical conversation from all parts of the world. And I'm looking forward to a really, really stirring, important conversation. Today is the forum's last spotlight session. We will be discussing the importance, the challenges, the barriers to, and the solutions for the empowerment of women, especially the economic empowerment of women at the grassroots. We're talking about change starting at the bottom and moving all the way up the ranks. And our spotlight speaker today really epitomizes that grassroots economic empowerment of millions of women in my home country of India. But before we introduce our spotlight speaker today, just a little bit of housekeeping. Now, remember, the sessions are being recorded. This is because they are then available for all of you if you miss bits or you want to revisit portions, or anyone who could not actually tune in for the session live, they will be available on demand. There's also interpretation and captioning that is available. So do look for the Interprofile link should you need interpretation of languages. If you would like to take part in this session using English as your chosen language, all you have to do is select source. For interpretation and captions in Russian, select Russian from the drop-down menu. And remember that there are drop-down summaries always available. And finally, there is always help available in the chat box. We're also very pleased to encourage your questions, and there will be a special time allocated for our audience to be able to engage directly with us and our speakers today. So let's get the ball rolling. It is my honor to introduce a woman that I have long admired in an organization that has made a global brand for itself. Our spotlight speaker today is Reema Nanavati. Reema Nanavati leads an organization called Seva. Seva, by the way, incidentally, in Hindi means service. And what a service that they have done for millions of women, enabling them to stand on their own feet, literally, economically, physically, emotionally, and metaphorically. Seva actually stands for the Self-Employed Women's Association, and Reema Nanavati, as its executive director, through Seva, reaches out to millions of women, 17 million women at last count, and their families, enabling a revival of rural and traditional livelihoods, but also agribusiness, textiles. Many of us from my part of the world all own what's called a Seva Kurta, which is amongst the best sort of shirts, hand-spun shirts that you can get this side of the world. I can vouchsafe for that. And more seriously, actually, Seva is the single largest union of informal workers in India, and it is in effect the largest central trade union in India as well. So there's a lot to unpack. Reema Nanavati has been awarded with one of the highest civilian honors in India, the Padma Shri, in 2013. She's an extraordinary woman, and works with some extraordinary women as well. So let's get started right away, and do remember to post your questions for Reema in the chat box, where I will pick them up later. Reema, welcome, and great to see you here. And welcome to this spotlight session as our keynote speaker today. Now, the data that I'm about to take our audience through, you of course are familiar with, but I think it helps to reiterate these numbers when we look at the participation of women in the informal sector, what we call the informal economy. In South Asia, over 80% of women in non-agricultural jobs are in informal employment. In sub-Saharan Africa, that number is 74%. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, that number is 54%. Now, obviously, working in this, what we call the informal economy, often comes without institutional protection. women are often not able to access what other sectors guarantee in terms of labor law protection, protection against sexual harassment, and social benefits, in particular pensions and health insurance schemes or paid sick leave. There is no access to this institutionally, Rima, in the informal sector. Women end up working for lower wages. Women risk themselves physically. Even the sexual harassment guidelines that traditionally apply to all workspaces, there's a gray area as to whether they do apply to spaces that aren't defined formally as the workspace. And what ends up happening is that fewer women who work in the sector globally, this is not, of course, just about India, as we said, it's a global pattern, end up receiving, fewer women end up receiving pensions, and more elderly women as a result globally are now living in poverty. So this is really how dire this is, and this is how urgent this conversation is. I want to start with just asking you a simple question: why? Let's first try and understand why women are so overrepresented in the informal economy, and what are the key barriers that they're facing when we look at women pensionless, without insurance, without economic security, without economic protection. What should we be doing? So let's start at the why before we get to the what.
Thank you so much, and namaste. And I think you laid a very good background, which clearly shows that, we do need to discuss this issue very much. And to your question, the reason why women are overrepresented in the informal sector is because they are underrepresented in almost all decisions related to our economic development path. Budget allocation decisions, management or finance, access to banking, employment policies, city planning, mobility and transport projects, digitalization, utilization of credit, development of businesses, and I can go on and on and on. And as you were saying that, these women are at the grassroots, the bottom, but we at SEWA call them as the wheels of the pyramid. They contribute, they are very active in the economy, and therefore, as you say that, they are overrepresented in the informal economy. And why are there so many women in the pit? That's the question we all need to start, probing and answering. And because they are pushed and pulled down from the top, it's as simple as that. But the matter is even more serious. And I would like to, share that it is not only women, but most workers, their social enterprises, good technology, green finance, and more are becoming less important to our economy. We're building formal economy by stripping informal economy of its resources, jobs, markets, capital, structures, institutions, processes, finance, legal status, and more. Descaling, decapitalization, degrowth are taking place at devastating rate. See what we did to our migrant workers during the COVID pandemic and the resulting lockdown, women included in the lockdown. And even now, they have no protection, as you were saying, from similar brutal pushback to poverty. So that's the reason why women are overrepresented in the informal economy. And my understanding, and therefore my question to everyone today, is that when 93% of workforce in a country like India is in the informal sector, majority of them being women, obviously it is these women of the informal economy who are the mainstream. What is the other mainstream we are talking about? That's my question, because the majority of the workforce is in the informal sector, and that's where majority of women workers are. And therefore, according to me and according to our members at SEWA, we are the mainstream. So I think the world needs to learn on the new economic pathway that we are all working on. How do we partner with these women in the informal sector? That's what one will have to learn and relearn and unlearn. And I think the current pandemic has to put the interest of the workers, especially women from the informal economy, at the heart of the global call to build back better. I don't think we can now neglect it. It has highlighted the failure of the current economic models of shareholder capitalism and created an opportunity to rebuild our economies and societies where the interest of the women workers have to be at the center. We call it as the human-centered approach to work. I'll stop here, but I hope that I
Yeah.
try to do justice to your question.
No, I'm actually so happy that you located your answer in the context, Rima, of the COVID pandemic, because, I spent the last 18 months traveling across India, reporting on this pandemic. And when the migrant exodus started, which you did reference in the first wave, I was walking with these people, the poorest Indian citizens, as they walked thousands of kilometers to their home during the first lockdown. And many of them were women and children. And it bears underlining that while we call the virus the great equalizer, it has been anything but. Its consequences for women and the girl child in particular have been devastating. Even conservative estimates by the United Nations suggest that 54 million women have actually lost their jobs. Rima, you're familiar with these figures. We know that girls are being forced back in emerging economies into enforced marriages, underage marriages as they fall out of school. Physical schools in our part of the world have remained closed, and schools are not just a place for education, they're also a place for basic physical security, like getting a sanitary pad or a hot cooked meal. So we are seeing, and female labor force participation in any case in our part of the world was on the decline. So the consequences of COVID have been devastating for women and girls. Domestic violence, sexual abuse, all of this has been on the rise as economic security is on the decline. Now, with this backdrop of the COVID pandemic, Rima, what are some of the innovative approaches that can be taken to offer protection, insurance, also ambition, dreams? Because as you said, it's time to start looking at the informal sector as the mainstream, not as something that happens on the side. What are some of those measures that we should be talking about, that we aren't talking about, that all of our institutions, ranging from social sector enterprises to businesses, to policy, to government agencies, to non-governmental agencies, need to be looking at?
I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think it's time that we all need to start thinking collectively on this. And, our experience shows that women in the informal sector do know what to do and what to innovate. We let them innovate first and then offer support to the innovations where we want to. And I think this narrative has to change. How can this work? It cannot work that way. We must join in what women are doing, what women innovate, and they do. In thousands, Seva joins these initiatives and help women nurture, sustain, water, and grow them. I think there is need to mainstream gender concerns in constructive way that leads to economic models that do not create increase in concentration of wealth in the hands of a few at the cost of these many women workers. And our experience working with the informal sector women workers now for almost 5 decades, and especially during the COVID crisis, has shown that some of the major challenges faced by these women are access to working capital. But what has really worked, and I would like to share here, is that organizing is the key. We do need to organize women. It helps build the collective strength and bargaining power of the women workers. It leads to generating alternative economic opportunities, which then take the form of member-owned or women workers-owned economic organizations, such as cooperatives, collectives, federations, associations, companies, farmers, producer organizations, producer companies which are owned and managed by these women workers themselves. So I think this is what is the key: membership-based organization of the poor women workers. The main characteristics, therefore, would be that the members themselves just don't remain workers or producers, but they become the owners and managers, the shareholders. These organizations have to be non-political and democratically functioning, and often based on trust issue, camaraderie of women coming together. It helps build their confidence. They are in a position to take on any challenges that the life may bring them in future. And it not only strengthens the livelihoods of the members, but also increases their collective bargaining strength, broadens access to market, and generates an array of employment opportunities. And I think I can give n number of examples, but I'll start by one example of women working in the dry desert areas of our country, and where they have the traditional skills, but very often they don't know that how do they turn that into an economic proposition. And Seva is organized, as you were referring, that everybody has a shirt from Seva's women, and I'm wearing one today as well. And we now have over 60,000 such women who have formed their own company. And the whole objective is that how do you build a decentralized local supply chain? And I think this decentralized local supply chains continue while the global supply chains and the national supply chains are disrupted by certain shocks and the pandemics, but these decentralized local supply chains continue working. And I would like us to listen to one of the shareholders of such a company, Sakhi Ben. She's a young artisan. So can we all listen to her?
I think we're just waiting for that video to queue up, Rima, the story that you so eloquently described and being told at the back end that they're trying to queue that up. But if they're not able to, we'll give them about a few seconds and then we'll move on. So I'm just waiting to hear from the back end, and otherwise we can circle back to it as they try and.
I think the reason why I wanted us to listen was that it is an intrinsic decentralized local supply chain model, where we procure locally, produce locally, sold locally. A whole range of collection of garments. Women turned over artisans to.
No, I know it would be extraordinary to see it, but let's circle back to it. I think they're trying to queue it up at the back end, and we'll come back to it maybe as we go along. Okay, let me ask you this, Rima,
sure.
as we wait for the video. In many countries, there is what's described as a unique mix of social barriers, and we have to understand that there isn't any one dimension that actually holds women back from participation in the economy. So we cannot, for example, divorce the underrepresentation of women in political life from it. We cannot ignore the global statistic. I think I read last that there are only 24 female heads of states globally. So, the fact is, in our own countries, we've been struggling with the dwindling numbers of women's representation in our parliament, in our assembly. And we've been locked into a debate over affirmative action forever. The reason I raise some of these examples is many things come together to create a collection of social barriers that inhibit women from economic empowerment. They can relate to the absence of equality at home. They can relate to the absence of female leaders in public life. They can relate to safety. They can relate to the lack of access simply to public transport. So many girls, for example, do not go to school and drop out the moment they become, of puberty age because there are no sanitary pads. There are so many. How do we change the narrative and in a new economic context to tackle these unique mix of social barriers?
I think I fully agree that, do we definitely need to change the narrative? And as I was saying in the beginning, that when 93% is in the informal sector, majority of them are women workers, They are the mainstream. And therefore, I think, there are working proof that local decentralized economies are the future of work and the workers. And that needs to be now definitely recognized by the policymakers, the multilateral agencies, the financial institutions. There is a need to strengthen such local decentralized supply chains, thereby ensuring equitable share of profit and risks across the supply chains. We all still tend to look at large national supply chains, global supply chains. We want FDIs coming in so that we build large corporations. But when will we strengthen these women workers so that they are able to manage their own local economies? And that's what we need to build, an economy which is a nurturing economy where women are in the leading position. Women decide what kind of economy that they would really like. It also leads to generating green livelihood opportunities, curb rural outmigration, mitigate poverty through asset creation, reduce the carbon footprint of the villages, and above all, provide income security to these workers, women workers in the informal sector, especially in the rural areas. And therefore, I think we must move towards new economy, what we call building economy of nurturance, where planting trees is more lucrative than cutting down trees. We all are experiencing the climate change effects, and everybody is talking about climate action. It's time that we now start climate action, where harvested water is valued and mining water is taxed. So that's the way the narrative completely needs to change, where raising children is as important as education or health, and where growth of employment is prized over growth of economy per se. So that's where the narrative again needs to change, where investments are primarily made to create jobs and profit is an important byproduct, not the main core of it, where economic growth happens at the family level first, and where structures such as ADB or the World Bank, or for that matter, the country governments, are at the service of the poor and the women. That's where the narrative needs to be changed. And I think we all need to focus on a human-centered, or I would go further to say women worker-centric approach to work.
In fact, Reema, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's a question from the audience related just to what you're talking about. And that says, do we need a new social contract that better serves women? And if so, what would this new social contract actually look like? You have described and unpacked some bits of it. So if you want to just go on and talk, you've spoken about a new economy, but the new economy would need a new social contract as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad that, the question also has come on that. And I think the new social contract, first of all, we need to create a space for that. I think the space for social contract has completely been closed. And I think that's where one needs to begin with. The new social contract and that's where women have to play a very responsible and a very important role. And what I was referring to was that how do women take leadership role? How do you build agency which is women-centric, women organized? We do have the livelihood missions and a lot of programs, but they are only at the programmatic level. But they all need to be mainstreamed. Everybody needs to learn to partner with these women's organizations, women's economic organizations. And I would also say that, the narrative of investment also needs to change. We do need to look at new financing mechanisms that are women friendly. We need to have blended financing facilities, which is, a blending of grants.
So give us an example. Give us an example. We often hear this phrase microfinance. And even when we talk about women CEOs in the organized sector, we talk about the lack of access by women to capital. When we're looking at this mainstream of where most women work, What is the barrier to accessing this capital to start, and what is the barrier to accessing economic protection after women stop working actively? Which in other spaces would be pension or insurance or employee benefits. What about all of that?
So, Barkha, social protection only works when the livelihoods are stabilized. And when livelihoods are stabilized, then a minimum income continues. And when there is some minimum income, then only, social protection works, insurance, pension, healthcare. But when there is no stability of livelihood, when there's no resilience amongst the women as workers, amongst their very tiny and micro enterprises. And that's why you need to move beyond microfinancing. You need to move beyond microcredit and look at credit plus. And that's the kind of a blended financing facility. I mean, you don't want an alternative to a bank.
Yes.
We do know that the banks fail and the MFIs are also sort of, if I am giving a commercial rate of interest, but what is it that women want to pay back at their own terms, which is affordable and which builds resilience? It helps them access new technologies, as you were saying, access financial services at their own terms. And that's what we call Women's Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund. That's the kind of a new financing facility that everybody now needs to think about and work on.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. I want to give another try to play the video that you were talking about, the stories coming from the ground. So I'm going to just request our producers if we can play that.
નમસ્તે, મારું નામ સખી છે, મારું ગામ ધોકાવાડા છે, તાલુકો સાંતરપુર છે, જિલ્લો પાટણ છે. હું એક સેવાની સભ્યબેન છું, સેવા સાથે 12 વર્ષથી જોડાયેલી છું. હું સેવાની ત્રીજી પેઢી છું. અને હાલમાં જે વૈશ્વિક મહામારી કોરોના આવી તેમાં ઘણા બધા બહેનોની એમ કે રોજગારી જતી રહી, પરંતુ અમારી ખુદની ઉન્નત બજાર કંપની હતી તો અમને એમ કે ઘરે બેઠા રોજગારી મળી રહી અને અમે આજે કોરોના મહામારી છે તેની સામે ટકી રહ્યા. અને બીજું એ કે હાલનું જે અર્થતંત્ર છે તેની સામે હાલની જે ગરીબ બહેનો છે તેને જો ટકી રહેવું હશે તો હાલના યુગમાં પોતે ખુદ એક કે ટેકનોલોજીનો ઉપયોગ કરતા શીખવું પડશે. અને બીજું કે જે પોતે છે તો પોતાને ખુદનો વીમો લેવો જશે. અને બીજું એ કે પોતે જે ધંધો કરે છે એનો પણ પોતે વીમો લેવો જશે, જેના માટે હાલમાં જે વિવિધ પ્રકારની આફતો આવે છે તો તેમાં જો પોતાનો વીમો હશે, પોતાના ધંધાનો વીમો હશે તો જ પોતે ટકી રહેશે. અને એના માટે પોતે તાલીમો પણ લેવી પડશે. જો ટેકનોલોજીનો ઉપયોગની તાલીમ લેશે અને જો ઘરે બેઠા એ શીખશે તો જ હવેનો જે યુગ હશે એ બધું જ એમ કે ટેકનોલોજીથી જ થતું હશે, તો એને ટેકનોલોજી પણ આવડવી એટલી જરૂરી હશે.
Okay, so she was speaking in Gujarati, of course, but the gist was very clear, Rima, that basically that hunger also to learn new skills and new technology. And an interesting data point that comes up right now is that even when we look at the smartphone, one of the transformative technologies that could help in economic empowerment, there isn't equal access between men and women to a phone. There isn't equal access for boys and girls. For example, in these 2 years of online schooling, if there is one phone in a poorer household, then the boy will get access and not the girl, and then that pushes young girls into enforced underage marriages and so on. We do have one more audience question, but I want you to quickly talk about this video in a minute, and then we'll keep 1 minute for one more audience question. Go ahead, Rima.
So, Barkha, we listened to Sakhi Ben, and I think to what you were just saying, our study has shown that 62% girls dropped out of school. Now when the schools are reopening, and the reason was access to, smart tools and smart technology. As you rightly said, if the house only has one smartphone and there are, 2 siblings, boy and a girl, or, the husband and the wife, who has access to that technology? Of course, it's the men and the boys. And the result, what we are now facing, is that there's a dropout of girls from the school. One works so hard. And therefore, I think data and digitization is another big area that everybody needs to invest on. And data is going to become the new tool for, leveraging and bargaining for women and girls. And platform economy is going to be a new public space. So
Yeah.
how do you build capacity? And that's what Sakhiben was talking about.
And another question coming from the floor, is interesting because I don't know that you would agree with its assumption, but the question is, how can we help women transition from the informal economy to the mainstream one? I think what I've heard you argue today is that the women are already in the mainstream economy, so it's the lens that needs to change in what you recognize to be the mainstream economy. But I think that the spirit behind the question is more about how do you protect women with institutional structures, from pensions to family leave benefits, to health benefits, in the way that a formal economy is mandated to do.
I'm so glad, and as you rightly said, the spirit is still there, and therefore we are optimistic and hopeful also that the world can still be a better place for one and all. And I think 2-3 things that I can think of, and one is that, one needs to invest enough of time and resources. We are so much into a project mode that you look at input and output. But here we are talking about building women's empowerment, and empowering women is a process. So I think that's one thing that, everybody needs to understand. The second is, as you said, the lens has to change. So it's the mindset of the educated urban middle class that also needs to change. And they also need to be much more open to relearn and unlearn. So that's the second thing I think one needs to look at. And I think we all need to be very conscious as to how do we make the transition just and fair. And that's what is the key.
I know that we're about the end, but if you can tell me 30 seconds of one thing that SEWA has done to actually safeguard the rights of its women, what would that be?
Organizing. And it's value-based organizing. If you don't compromise on your values, I think the women are able to face any challenges that may come in their way.
Well, I think the one story, Reema, that emerges from the SEWA model is that whether the nomenclature remains informal versus mainstream economy or not, women need representation, they need unions, they need organized sort of groups, both hyper-local, national, and globally to speak for the rights of women. And we're trying to do that in our own way here. It's been an education listening to you. Like I said, each one of us in India at least owns a kurta made by the women of SEWA. If you don't, Reema's wearing one. Do purchase one, but textiles is not the only space that SEWA is in, from literally from agribusiness to creating supply chains that are women-led and women-steered. SEWA has done it all and caused us, in a sense, to re-examine what we define as the mainstream economy and the alternative economy, reminding us that the mainstream economy is already where the maximum number of women work. So Reema Nanavati, thank you so much for that very, very critical conversation and creating a grassroots model. We're going to take a 30 minutes break now, but there's a very, very interesting conversation that's coming up on good practices and gendered governance. And I just want to give you a glimpse of who will be joining us. We're looking at good governance and gender social norms, as I said, and you can see that on your screen. We will have Julia Newton-Holst, the Chief Executive of Investing in Women. Michelle Harding is also joining us from the OECD's Center for Tax Policy and Administration, Karen Brown from the World Bank, and we also have Kelera Kolivoso-Ravono from the Ministry of Economy in Fiji, Sunita Pitambar from the EBRD, and Bruno Carrasco from the ADB. So that's really a power-packed panel coming up on what might be the best practices. Reema gave us a template for a new social contract, a new economic language. What might that actually look at when translated and broken down into good practices? We have that coming up in 30 minutes from now. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with all of you, and I'll see you again back. So turn your clocks and see you soon in a short while from now. Looking forward.